Hello, and welcome to another episode of Painting with Stephen. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you're watching this, and let's get right into it. Um, First things first, some exciting news, if you want to support the channel, is I have set up an Etsy where I'm going to be putting all of the paintings that I do onto, a place where I can actually sell them and where you guys, if you want, can support the channel. So I'm going to put a link in the description. So if you want to check that out and help the channel out, that would be great. And if I've only got 3 up there right now, but if you guys have any requests for anything you see to be put up there for sale, please let me know down in the comments so that I can then upload it to Etsy, and then you guys can see if you want to buy it or not. So yeah, that's the first bit of news, is that I'll be putting my Etsy in the description of each video moving forward. But yeah, I mean, I think I suppose I should also bring up this camera angle. The camera angle wasn't ideal, I have to confess. Well, I don't know actually. Like, I'm trying to experiment with different camera angles, in different locations. To be honest with you, I'm veering again. I'm never gonna have a professional setup, or at least right now. I'm hoping over the next few months to try and get a far more professional setup going. But in my sort of current living arrangements, and like where I actually have access to places where I can paint, it's very, very difficult to actually find a place that is good to paint, that is also good for like lighting, place to put a camera, that sort of thing. But I'm veering towards the way I had it the first time, to be honest with you, because the one issue with this camera angle is that although it's closer to the canvas, so I thought it would maybe be slightly better for details and stuff like that. One issue I found with this was it got in my way, so when I was trying to do detail work, the camera was sort of in the way, and I found that quite annoying. So yeah, I might just go back to the way it was before. But yeah, I guess I'm just gonna have to experiment and see. I mean, I suppose the one last thing that I could try is having the camera directly behind me, zoomed in, so that I can but then I'd be obviously directly in the way whenever I was painting. So I don't know, it's almost like it's a catch-22. It feels like whatever I choose it has an advantage and a drawback. So yeah, we shall see what I decide on. So again, apologies in advance if this camera angle doesn't suit you, or if you were used to the first one. In episode 22 as well, I experimented with a different location and a different camera angle. The problem with that one was the camera wobbled pretty much every single time I did anything, and so again it was impeding the painting process slightly. I didn't feel comfortable when I was painting. I felt like the camera was constantly wobbling, so that was annoying as well. So yeah, I mean, you just have to experiment around with this sort of stuff, This is a big canvas, 50 by 60. Usually I've been doing smaller canvases, especially for YouTube recently, but I actually had this one lying around before I even started the channel. I'd sketched it all out and was ready to do it, but then actually ended up sort of adding things in, like, you know, I added in the Scottish manor house, you know, because we have sort of manor houses of that shape and that style, very martial, grey buildings, sort of everywhere in Scotland. You know, big estates, big manor houses. They're very impressive. A lot of the time, they're very they have a certain atmosphere to them, a robustness. So I added that in, sort of into the sketch when it wasn't there before. But I've had this lying around, this ginormous canvas, for ages. I ran out of all the other canvases. I usually use smaller ones that I buy from Home Bargains. And I ran out of all other canvas sizes, so I was just like, well, I'm not going to go out and buy more, for one reason, because I'm skint, and then that's the only thing I had. So I was like, do you know, it's now or never. I suppose I should just do it. So I've done it, and I don't regret it, actually. For whatever reason, I put it off for ages, mostly because I just had other ideas. And then I was like, no, actually, I should just do it. And I'm actually glad that I tackled this now instead of when I originally sketched it out months and months ago, because I feel like I've, you know, definitely improved a lot as a painter since I actually originally sketched it out. And I think probably the sort of symbolist, dreamlike, almost liminal feel that I wanted this painting to evoke, probably I can do that style a lot better than what it would have been if I had tried to tackle it many months ago. So yeah, I think that's quite exciting, that I've gotten that out of the way. Now I can move on to sort of what I wanted to actually do originally for episode 23, which will now be episode 24. But yeah, that's for another episode, and that's for another time. This was painted over, again, a 2-week period. You know, such a big canvas, I think it was probably a good thing that I painted it over a 2-week period. I pretty much did the sky, which as you're seeing right now, in week 1, and then I did pretty much everything else in week 2. So it was actually a nice little break as well, like it broke up very naturally, you know, in terms of how I organised my time. So yeah, and I'm doing that sort of this haunting blue sky that I like to do with the moon. Originally, the moon also wasn't in the sketch, but I decided to add the moon in, to give it just, again, a focal point in the sky. I really like moonlit nights. I feel they're very evocative. They have an ethereality to them. They have a tranquility, but also a creepiness, depending on how you utilize them. And yeah, I also wanted between the clouds to have these stars. But I looked at painting them in. If you followed this channel before, what you'll know is that usually I don't actually paint in stars with a brush. I water down my paint and spray the canvas, because I feel like it gives a far more realistic effect. it's a very, very useful way to get detail in quickly. It's a bit like palette knife painting. I just feel like, why waste time, right? Like, a lot of people maybe are elitist about it. I don't know whether that's the right word to utilise, but I think a lot of people can maybe sometimes be a little bit like, oh well, you know, that's not how it would have been done in the past. Who cares though? Realistically, if it saves you time and effort, and it then frees your time up to then focus on other parts of the painting, and it keeps the painting process lucid, keeps you on a roll, keeps you actually focused, and not, like, giving all of your time to these little details that bog you down. I think it's a good thing. So yeah, I went in to paint them by hand with a brush, and I didn't like the way it looked. I didn't like the way it came out, so I changed it. And I think one of the main reasons I wanted to try and attempt it with a brush off the bat was to get bigger stars, like almost more sort of big, juicy white ball stars rather than fleck stars. But then I just realised, and I think this is just, again, part of my aesthetic choice. I just always prefer sort of almost like the more cosmic-y, scattered star, small star look. I just prefer it. I just like it more. It excites me more when I look at it. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up utilising the sort of more like watered down paint, sort of fleck technique, and that I feel like worked pretty well, because what I did was I sort of had the focal point of the stars up at where that blue sort of light break is between the clouds, but then also a lot of the stars at the bottom are still there, but a lot more subdued, which is a lot more lifelike, I suppose you could say. Usually stars are higher in the sky, and then the lower you get, yeah, there are stars, but they're obviously a lot more subdued by light from, obviously, light pollution from Earth, but also just because cloud coverage is so much more dramatic, down at the sort of like mid to bottom of the sky. So I feel like that worked out relatively well. So yeah, just getting all that sort of covered up, so that I, like, basically when I get into week 2, I would be able to just sort of go into, yeah, like, the sort of actual focal point of the painting, which is going to be these sort of archway viaduct type things, and the castle, and, well, the rest of the painting, the sort of focal point, land focal point. So yeah, I've got to say, it was quite an interesting painting to paint. It's a huge size, but it didn't actually feel like a huge size. I feel like things like Every Empire Must Fall were a lot harder to tackle than this. Maybe because there was less details attached to this, but yeah, I feel like this was actually relatively, like, okay. It wasn't the painting that was actually the issue. But this takes me into my next point that I want to talk about. after I take a drink, sorry, which is the true genuine purpose of painting, and the true genuine purpose of actually dedicating all this time and effort to do something. Because what I will say is there were periods when I was painting this where I wasn't really in the mood at all. You know, I don't want to use the word depression, but I didn't feel good. You know, over the maybe the last couple of weeks, there were other things going on in life that made me, you know, just not very enthusiastic about, you know, for example, doing something like this. And a lot of people will use painting as an escape from that. Personally, I don't think that's quite what happens with me. I feel like for me it's if my attention to detail is high and, you know, my mood is good, then I'll be able to achieve something like this a lot better than if my mood is low and my attention to detail is low. And I think this sort of posits an interesting question as to, do you give up and wait until inspiration takes you, or do you forge ahead and force yourself to paint? And here's what I have to say. I would say, within reason, you should pretty much always force yourself to paint. And you should, for that matter, you should force yourself to do everything. Whether that means lifting weights at the gym, rucking, picking up your guitar, you know, you should be forcing yourself to do everything, even when you're in a depressed or a non-enthusiastic state. Because these things are the things that are going to keep you sort of sane, and although you might be in a depressive state, you'll get out of it at the other end in a far better state than if you've just been sort of sedentary for weeks. And I think that the thing is that with things like this, I think a really important point to note is the fact that obviously a lot of the time it's a destructive cycle that ends up happening, where if people are depressed, they don't do anything, and then it's that not doing anything that actually solidifies the depression even more and stops people from actually having the willpower to then go and do other things and get them out of it. But here's the thing, I think a lot of the time depression's more just like a big black cloud that comes over mentality. And so depending on, you know, the situation, or whether it's a specific thing that's caused this to occur, or whether it's just a general feeling of unhappiness or dread or what have you, I think maintaining normal routine is gonna set you up so that when that black cloud goes away, you're still almost in a position to actually just go and start life again from a better perspective. I feel like you're setting yourself up in a far better position than if you just did nothing. But when it comes to inspiration, I think a lot of people, when they talk about art, they talk about, I need to be inspired. I don't think that's true necessarily. I think almost you can use that in a very dangerous way, which is you just make an excuse to yourself and go, I don't feel inspired, and so I'm not going to try, and I'm not going to do anything. And then that puts you in a position where you never do anything, and you hardly ever paint, or you hardly ever play guitar or whatever, and you don't make any progress. At some point you need to force yourself to actually work at it, and actually just dedicate time, which will not always be fun, to crafting the skill that you want to have. I think when it comes to painting especially, I think it's really, really important more to have foundations in place that allow you to properly utilise your time effectively, so that even if you are in an unenthusiastic mood, it's not going to hinder your progress. And I think that's, for example, preparing a good sketch, for example, preparing what your composition is going to be, having ideas in mind, and all of these things mean that when you actually get to the painting process, if you aren't in an enthusiastic mood, it doesn't really matter, because you've pre-planned it, and so all you need to do is almost just dedicate yourself and put a little bit of time and effort in to actually see it through. It doesn't feel like as much of an undertaking as almost just having to force yourself to come up with these sort of concepts from scratch, in a way. I feel like routine, in terms of like, I will paint this day at this time, are also very useful for that. Or Friday is my painting day, Saturday is my painting day, I'm going to paint every week at this time. I think that's a very, very healthy way to live life, with routine. Routines ground you. Routines give your life shape and purpose, and so routineless lives a lot of the time. And I think again, we've all been, as creatives, we've all been guilty of, I'm not inspired, I'm not going to do it, and then it's 5 weeks have gone by and you've still not done anything. This is the issue. With a routine, you are almost forcing yourself to do it, and you always are in a better position when you have. You've at the other end, you pretty much always never regret doing it rather than not doing it. And this leads me on to my next point about what I'm trying to say, and I think I'm very sorry about the waffling here, because I know I'm probably not articulating myself as well as I should, but my other point about something like this is, again, the why we paint. This is, in a way, for me, although not a form of escape, in the sense that it doesn't help me forget about my troubles or worries or anything like that, but painting is an incredible medium, as is all art, to explore inner emotions on a canvas. This is why things like, for example, artificial intelligence art will only ever be derivative and will never be genuinely artistic. I'm not saying that art has to always be original in, for example, composition or theme or anything like that, because that is very, very, very clearly missing the point. The point is that it has to come from a place of emotional intent, and only organic life has emotional intent. And the thing is a lot of that emotional intent comes from our imperfect, flawed nature as decaying organic life, with failures in love or failures in life or financial troubles or existential crises or whatever it may be, that creates a fragility in our life, creates a fragility in our psyches, in the way that we actually view the world. And it makes, for example, paintings far more interesting than, for example, something merely just copying those emotional intents. I feel like, it's a bit like someone writing a genuinely troubled song, versus someone pretending to almost just write an emotional song because they know that it will get them money or something like that. It's you can very clearly tell that the emotional intent isn't there. I think with things like painting, going back to the first point about having routine and having all of these things in place that allow you to continue to thrive and paint and create while sometimes not feeling like it. On to the second point, a lot of the time the themes of your paintings, the composition of your paintings, although you might not be in the mood to create them that moment, they allow you to explore a darker side of your thoughts, a darker side of your personalities, a more mysterious, forbidding side, or like a more sort of dreamlike escapism. All of these things can come out in art and allow you to escape from, I suppose you could say, the practical side of life that stops you from having these sort of feelings. So I feel like that is very useful for people that are going through dark or troubling times in their life. And I'm not saying I'm going through a dark or troubling time in my life, far, far, far from it. But there were things that were bothering me over the last 2 weeks that made me not really enthusiastic about the painting process. But it didn't matter that I wasn't enthusiastic, because a painting was still produced. And that, I think, is very important. I really feel like routine, set and setting, all of these things, what the painting is, have ginormous effects on that. Ginormous effects on, whether you'll still find the will to actually paint things like that or not, I wanted this to feel very dreamlike, liminal, creepy, interesting. And I guess that's another thing, is that my art always tends to lean towards the darker side. I suppose you could say, or at least to my mind it does. I don't tend to ever really enjoy painting things like sunrises or pastoral, type landscapes, that sort of thing. There always has to be some sort of dark forebodingness or at least mysteriousness or intrigue, for me to sort of keep my attention or hold my attention, because that's just what excites me about painting. So yeah, depending on how you approach your own paintings, I suppose. If you're painting things like sunny meadows and you know, pets and sort of dandelions and, you know, flowers and this sort of thing, maybe it's a very different thing, a very different process, in the sense that if you weren't feeling in a happy, chipper state of mind, you just wouldn't really want to paint these sort of happy scenes. But then at the same time, I can also imagine that the joy and tranquility that a lot of those scenes give you would actually mean that you know, that in itself could be a form of escapism, or a reminder to focus on the good and the happy and the beautiful within dark times. So, you know, I feel like painting, again, this goes back to really why we paint. It always has emotional intent, always. It doesn't matter what the painting is, there's always going to have to be an emotional intent behind it in order for it to actually mean something. And putting a unique, original slant on something is a really important big part of that. So yeah. As you can see, I'm making this sort of differentiation between the two parts of the archway slash viaduct slash whatever it is. I would call it an archway because, well, I didn't intend for this to look like a viaduct. I intended it more to look like a weird sort of archway that, you know, who knows what, you know, parts of it have crumbled away, and you know, it sort of looks almost like a place where ceremonies would have taken place back in the day, or yeah, who knows what the connection is with this foreboding manor over there. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm making sort of like two distinct textures when it comes to this. One is a sort of painted texture and the other is with a knife. Again, this comes back to almost like what I was saying about the stars. Knives, just firstly, they can give you so much detail so quickly, but second of all, they produce a textured effect that can then allow you to just instantly differentiate between, for example, strokes, you know, like different sort of like brush techniques that then instantly create a contrast in texture. And I think that can be really, really useful when you're painting a painting. So yeah, like the knife, I use the knife all the time. It's a super handy tool for me. You know, I love, you know, again, we've discussed on this channel before about utilising not just the light of a painting, like what you're painting, in terms of color usage and shadow and light and different things like that, but also utilising the way the light hits your canvas in real life. A lot of the time, the super textured palette knife work allows little lumps and bumps to catch light in real life on the canvas that can almost create a different type of effect, which I think is really cool and quite important. So yeah, I think keep that in your wheelhouse. Always like get ready, I think, to use a knife. Knives are very, very useful tools for just doing a lot of things quickly, or just and also just being able to sort of have a bit of fun with it, and just sort of you know, playing around with texture, playing around with you know, the different sort of ways to approach painting. People always sort of think just brush, but palette knife painting is so useful for just creating rough texture. So yeah, and here's me putting green, just dark, moody, umber and blue greens down here, to create the beginnings of my sort of ground, you know. And a hell of a lot of this umber base layer is still going to be shining through in my ground. I didn't think it looked bad. Like a lot of the time, I don't really let a lot of my umber layer shine through, but I guess with this one I was just a bit like, I mean, it looks good, and I'm not really in the mood to just constantly go over again to get rid of all the umber layer. Plus it doesn't look out of place, so I ended up keeping a lot of that umber layer in, as you'll see with the end result. So yeah, I think a lot of the time, like, umber layers allow you to have that flexibility where you can just sort of add in your different colours on top and leave so much of that umber layer shining through, which gives it that innate sort of tonalist and symbolist feel, and also allows you to just have so much flexibility with not having to paint every single little crevice of the canvas, and just allowing you to be able to leave things alone. So I think it's cool in that way. And yeah, umber layers are just super useful for that. As you can see, I'm actually using the palette knife here to etch in different sort of textures to make it almost look like layered, like almost like slate or something like that. But yeah, you can use palette knives very creatively to layer paint, layer texture. And I think, again, I've talked about this previously on my channel. People sort of see this as an oil technique, but in reality, although I definitely sort of learnt about it when I was an oil painter and really always associated it with oils, it's a very good acrylic technique due to the fact that acrylic paint is so fast drying. You can do really interesting textural things in a very fast amount of time with acrylics. So from that perspective, I think it's really useful. And you'll see me when I get to the earth, the greens and the browns, and the sort of rocks on the ground. You'll see me utilize the palette knife a lot just to get quick textures in, a quick variety of colors in. So yeah, it's great in that way. I really do think it's such a fast technique and an interesting technique and a fun technique, and it keeps everything dynamic. So I would highly recommend, if you don't do palette knife work right now, to at least try and somewhat incorporate it into your painting techniques to see how it works out for you. It's definitely not for everyone. I think one thing that's quite interesting with knife work is that, in a way, you're almost, especially if you don't know what you're doing with it, I imagine it can be quite intimidating if you've not done it before. So there might be an aspect of lack of control, the fear of lack of control with brushes, everything's very much more intentional, isn't it? It's a lot more, oh, I am putting the paint here, the paint is going here because I'm like placing it there, you know, whereas a lot of the time with knife work, it's a lot more up in the air, it's a lot more, yeah, it's a lot more almost controlled chaos, which is very useful, again, if you know how to harness it and utilize it properly. If you don't know how to harness and utilize it properly, it can get you into a whole heap of trouble. That's like painting in general though, isn't it? That's painting 101. You know, I mean, pretty much everything when it comes to painting really has that sort of, you know, that sort of relationship. If you're experienced enough with certain things and certain aspects, it's fine. But as soon as you probably when you try and do it the first time, or the second time, or the third time, and you don't have context or previous experiences to teach you about these things, yeah, it can be quite intimidating, and it can produce some questionable results, shall we say. But you should always try. Trying is better than not. You might find that it lends you some really interesting stuff. So, yeah. I would recommend, for sure, I would recommend trying palette knife painting. Another thing that I really like to do, and this is something that I suppose you could say I've learned from water techniques and oils, but now that I utilize a lot, is placing paint down with a palette knife to create the sort of break in the texture, and then smoothing it out, you know, to almost like take away some of the harshness of the break, but still keep the variety of colours in there. You know, it's, again, you can do all sorts of creative stuff. Just need to be careful. Right now I'm just filling in, you know, a lot of, you know, the gaps in this sort of archway, and, you know, like, I suppose that's the thing, especially with big canvases, is a lot of the work and effort and time is really just blocking in. That's just the way it goes, you know, like, so much of what you do is just blocking in. It can get quite annoying if you're not in the mood for it, because, you know, you're trying to obviously get on with the painting and progress it, and then, you know, there's just all of this bare canvas still there, and you're just like, ugh, you know. And that's why, again, you really need to be in the mood for this sort of thing. And also why you should have your composition properly laid out, and actually organize your composition beforehand. Again, really, really important, because, you know, imagine you were trying to do all of this freehand. Honestly, imagine if you didn't have a orchestrated composition here. You were trying to make all of this up on the spot. I just don't think that it works. I also don't think that it's going to give you the best result. You know, if thing is, right, ideas are like seeds. You have an idea for a painting, and you know, you have the colours in your head, you have the scene in your head, you have maybe a loose idea of the composition in your head. That's the seed. But in order to actually allow that to blossom into a fully fledged plant, or allow that to blossom into the beautiful flower that it could be, you need to go through several stages of work and effort to let that happen. It's the same with songs, right? See, for example, you can sit down at a guitar and you can come up with a really good riff, okay? And that riff can be the foundation for a good song, but it's all very well, and I think a lot of people are guilty of this. It's all very well sitting at your guitar and going, that's a good riff, right? Oh, I've got a good riff. See, if I had a band, this would make a really good song or whatever. But here's the thing about that, right? Is that there's so many other things that you need to think about in order to actually make that into a good song. If you're doing it all yourself, this is doubly true. But even if you're working in a band setting, this is still true, because you know, the lyrics, the vocals, the way everything's mastered and produced and panned, the way, you know, the EQs are set up, you know, the different effects that you're going to put onto the master recording, the drums, you know, the bass, you know, how all of the parts fit into each other. All of these things are so important, right? So, yeah, you might have a really great foundation, but it won't make a great song until you work out all of those parts as well. And also, it might not necessarily actually make as good a song as you thought before, you know, once you start adding all of these other things in the place. You know, for example, a great foundational structure for, like, you know, let's say you found like a perfect bit of land to build a house on. That is all very well and good. The land may be, you know, nice and it's not swampy, and so you can build a house on it and it's all good. But then the house itself, what happens if you're using shitty materials to build the house on the good foundation? You know, what happens if you build the house and then fill it with complete cheap junk, you know, flat pack furniture, right? There's all sorts of other things that go into planning and getting a good result. So you can have a really great idea of how a painting's going to turn out, but your compositional structure is important. And so you may as well take the time when it's easier just to work that out before trying to do anything else. I feel like that's a really, really important thing, because if you don't do that, you run the risk of just producing something really bad. You know what I mean? And, you know, I think it's the reason that I would stress this is because I have made the mistake. You know, I spent years as a painter learning how to paint, or doing the thing that I'm saying you shouldn't do, which is starting with a blank canvas and just sort of painting a general idea which you've got in your head. You know, oh, I sort of wanted this there, I sort of wanted that there, so I'll try and do it now. And you're literally trying to do all the stages at once. You're trying to sort the composition out there and then. I don't think that works. I don't think that's a good way to paint. I think that it almost people sort of pretend that it gives them a notion of creative freedom, but I don't think it does give you creative freedom. I think it actually just curbs what you could be doing. I think actually, if you had taken the time to actually plan that stage out, you would have a better result and you actually have more creative freedom in that way, because then you're actually allowing yourself the time to breathe and really focus on what you're doing. And also, the better results are going to yield a more impressive creative expression at the end. So I just feel like almost like you're hindering your creativity, you're hindering the visions that you could be allowing to take shape on the canvas by not taking those times. And another thing that you're doing is, I think you're sort of restricting yourself. Well, no, you definitely are restricting yourself in many ways. One of those ways, which I think is a very important one, is thematically. I mean, see, when you actually plan out your compositional details and stuff like that ahead of time, you can add all sorts of stuff in, architecture and trees and whatever, right? But I think most of the time, I feel like it's like people that tend, especially now, that tend to do this sort of wet on wet, start from the beginning thing. It's like it all becomes sort of the same techniques, the same sort of looks at the end, and some of it's really awesome and cool. But you know, depending on what you're painting, like, you know, is painting 15 not going to look pretty similar to 225? Because, I mean, you know, for example, someone like Dennis Sheehan, right? He produces cool, sort of mysterious looking works, and I like his paintings. But at the end of the day, he sort of, in a way, just paints the same thing over and over again. And that's, I mean, I'm not trying to criticize when I say that, but I just mean, like, he's you know, pretty much like painting, for example, the same tree in the same place, because it's a composition that works. This is the thing. Because he's actually trying to do it all at once, he's experimented again and again with compositions that work, and then he's found one composition that works, and then he's basically seen that as, oh well, this works, so I'm going to use it again. I don't necessarily think that's probably the best way to go about things. I don't know, maybe I'm being really judgmental and awful there, but I don't know, because the way I see it is that you're restricting yourself to just, like, you know, oh, I'll get this fired out in one go, and that firing out in one go will mean that really you're subconsciously relying on basically only a few compositional motifs. They're always going to include the same thing, like landmass and a single solitary tree and a little bit of water, you know, and a sky that is, you know, usually the same. You know, obviously everybody gets into patterns of working and finds out things that work. For example, I mean, I suppose you could say that my dark skies with the moon, right? Yeah, you find some repetition, I suppose, with stuff like that. And you know, there's definitely, everyone has a style, so style is style, and so you're obviously going to find similarities from one work to another. And that's fine, but I'm just saying that, you know, like, even if you took those techniques, right, for example, the wipeout technique that a lot of tonalists use, and applied it to a pre-planned composition, I feel like you could get a lot more creative with your results. I feel like you could probably get a lot more creative with you know, like what is actually like being portrayed, being painted, instead of just sort of doing the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong. A lot of this comes from Ines, to be fair. I like Ines a lot as a painter. His compositions, though, with the tree and stuff like that, you know, I suppose that's sort of what a lot of the modern tonalists are trying to replicate, and certainly what they've ran with. And, you know, what a lot of people will now sort of see as the standard of, like, oh, well, this is sort of what you do if you want to be a tonalist painter, and use wipeout techniques and stuff like that. But Ines himself didn't use a wipeout technique. They've taken sort of these Ines-esque compositions that Ines worked on and pre-planned, and they've made sort of versions of it that then they can apply this technique to. You know, people like Dennis Sheehan, for sure, just took Ines compositions and changed them to fit his wipeout technique, and now you've got a whole load of people doing that wipeout technique from Sheehan. I don't know. I think pre-plan your composition. I think it works a lot better. That's my opinion on it. You know, I suppose, like, this, it sounds like I'm being really negative, which I don't actually mean to be, because the thing is that I actually really love a lot of that art. I find it really, really evocative and cool, and it has a lot of emotional power. So I'm definitely not criticizing it. I just think personally, in terms of workflow, I also think, just, you know, I may as well rant now. I may as well just sound like even more of a negative Nancy, right? And just throw this in. And we've talked about this on this channel before. Bob Ross, Bill Alexander, Dennis Sheehan, all of these guys, right? I think they're selling. Firstly, they're selling product usually, right? And see, now all of these sort of Bob Ross-esque painters on YouTube and stuff like that, a lot of them, they're selling products to you. So basically what they're telling you is, follow this magical technique and buy a product that's only going to work with my technique, like the liquid white thing, right? To keep the canvas, you know, like slippy and slidey, so that you can paint on top and stuff like this. It's sort of it's a good gimmick, but is it actually the best way to paint, the most optimal way to paint? I think what a lot of this is it's performative, right? It's very, very intelligent. You know, it's very, very intelligent in the sense that, you know, they're able to market this sort of thing to huge audiences, which is awesome. Well, especially if you were lucky enough, I suppose, to get your foot in the door when YouTube was just beginning. But I think what people forget is this is a performance, right? See, when Bill Alexander and Bob Ross and all of these sort of people, see, when they paint, it's a performance for the camera, and they've already pre-planned it, right? There's no doubt, right, that they've pre-planned it. And so all of this pretending to add stuff in on the fly and ad-libbing it is also a performance, right? It's all fake. And so you need to remember that. I think you know, as long as you have that a clear understanding in your head about that these things are performative and are really just for the sake of attracting an audience that are going to be kept entertained. Your painting is going to get better because you understand that this isn't necessarily meant to be replicated of how to paint, right? They're not trying to teach you in a way how to paint. They're trying to put on a show of how to paint, right? A lot of the time, the reality of how to really paint is maybe a bit more boring, less performative, isn't really meant for a camera, right? Like drawing out, you know, compositions and planning compositions and stuff like that isn't really, it doesn't lend itself to camera. It doesn't lend itself to camera work. It is, however, useful, right? And it allows you then to actually, you know, be a bit more methodical and a bit more laid out. You see what I'm saying? So don't sacrifice your own paintings just because you see someone else doing it on a camera. I think, you know, you should probably like think of it more as like, by all means take the techniques, but you know, again, like they're trying to sell you something. They're trying to put on a show. That's the way it is. And you know, good on them. But I suppose that's them basically saying like, I don't want to sell you my paintings necessarily. I want to sell you a product to keep my creativity going, and that's fantastic. And if you can get away with that and can do that, you should. But that's again not necessarily indicative of the best way to paint, right? And you know, it's certainly not how traditionally people were taught how to paint. And a lot of the time, what's showier isn't better. You know, a lot of the time, for example, using the sort of Bob Ross wet on wet technique that he teaches and so many other people now basically teach, using his style with the liquid white and all this sort of shit, right? Like, see when he's painting these trees with the highlights, right? It would be so much easier and better if you just literally allowed that to dry and then just painted another layer on top, right? Like, it would be so much easier to do that. So if you plan to have a pine tree in that area, paint your dark green, then let it dry, then paint your lighter highlight colours on top. It's just so much easier. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just so much easier to do that rather than, you know, sort of you're making it harder for yourself, I think, in a way, by trying to do this a la prima, by trying to do it wet on wet. It's going to get muddier. It's not going to be, you know, as good. You know, I think a lot of people talk about, is it fat over lean or stuff like this, like the more oil you have on your, like, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's all very well and good. That's cool. But wouldn't it just be easier if you allowed that to dry and then painted on top? Yeah, okay, with the oil medium, that's really, really difficult. And as an oil painter, I've struggled with that in the past. But yeah, I think that's why I jumped to acrylics, because it became clear to me once the more I did it how much simpler it was just to allow something to dry and then paint on top to get a cool layered effect. So I don't know. But yeah, I mean, everyone's different. Everything works different for people. So I don't know. Again, you know, I learned to paint from all of these people, and a lot of. But then, obviously, you follow their techniques, and then you go, this doesn't work, and you change them. Just the same way that a lot of people, if you're learning to paint from me, for example, you know, you'll take maybe some of the techniques that I'm trying to show, and then you'll change them as well, and you'll go, this doesn't work, and obviously this guy's a fucking lunatic, and you'd be right. and also talent comes into it as well. I'm probably a very untalented painter, so technique is one thing, being able to sort of harness technique is one thing, but talent is a different thing. Someone maybe could be able to do the same technique a lot better than me. I don't know, but I mean, yeah, like this is actually one thing I miss oils for, is doing mist like this, where you could literally just put in a wet oil and then wipe it out again. That's cool, whereas this is an acrylic mist, so I have to be a lot more careful, because if it dries, it dries, and then that's me, I'm done. You know what I mean? Like I've just wasted it, the whole painting, because I've put in the mist too thick, so yeah, there are definitely advantages to different mediums, for sure. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. Here's the end result. And I'm pretty happy with the end result. I think it's got a sort of good energy, a cool energy. There's definitely things that I maybe could have done slightly better, but I think I'm still pretty happy with it. I like how the mist turned out. I like the little fire, and like the sort of reflection on one of the broken arches over there, and the dark sort of trees, and probably my favourite part is the sky with the stars. I love doing that in general. That's just one of my favourite things to paint. And the sort of manor house in the background. So yeah, I'm happy with it. So now it's time to come up with a name, put it on YouTube, and just remember, again, a reminder, please check out my Etsy, which is going to be in the description. And again, if you see anything you like, let me know in the comments on YouTube, and I'll put it on there. But thank you so much for putting up with my rambling and listening, and goodbye.